Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wisdom Nutrition Podcast. This is Alex Sakin, and today I have an episode that is long overdue. It's going to be investigating a old lecture from Manly P. Hall titled Magnetic Fields of the Human Body, and this is one that's been on my radar for a number of months, and it's relevant for multiple reasons. Number one, this idea of electromagnetism and the relationship between the human body, the human soul, and the human mind, and this idea of electromagnetism interplays with some of the themes and ideas of human health that I had discussed in previous episodes, including the interview I did a couple months ago with Dr. Mark Bailey on the topic of the issues with virology and sort of debunking virology as a legitimate paradigm of science and of medicine. So in that episode, we didn't try to replace it as a theory, but it was mostly we were focused on going over the things that discredits it as a theory. So in this episode, certain ideas about human magnetism are going to come into the fold and offer us an alternative paradigm to understand certain things about health and illness and disease. And we're also going to be considering how the magnetic field of the human being extends outward like an aura. As it extends outward, it begins to mingle with the magnetic fields of other beings. And at a higher level, we find that the magnetic fields of all humans are interfacing together and consolidating into a collective field. And so this allows us to understand certain things about contagion, both physically but also psychologically. We have an idea that came out a few years ago about mass formation psychosis. So this actually explains the mechanism of action for how a type of collective psychological event can take place. It can originate in the collective magnetic field of the species and then move outward into its individual parts. So here again, this idea of the magnetic field interfaces with certain ideas from psychology, such as are discussed in the Jungian tradition, ideas like the collective unconscious. So what we consider the collective unconscious is very much related to this idea of a collective magnetic field or a collective aura. And so another implication of this is that this magnetic field that surrounds the body interfaces intimately with the mind. So typically today we think of the mind as arising from the brain, but again, there's all kinds of scientific problems associated with this conclusion. And instead, what we're left to conclude is that the brain is actually more like an antenna, that it receives the signals of the mind and then processes it. And so if the mind is not located in the brain, then where is it located? Where is the home for this thing that we call the mind? And the answer is in these magnetic fields. And these magnetic fields aren't just confined to the physical plane. At the lowest levels they are, but they extend into different metaphysical layers, and that metaphysical realm is the home of the mind. And so psychological issues or physical issues can happen with blockages and imbalances forming either on the physical body in terms of the antenna that is supposed to receive the signals of the mind. If that gets messed up, like brain damage or some kind of physical toxicity, poisoning, that will cause disease and disorder and imbalance because it interferes with the body's ability to receive into itself the incoming energies of these magnetic auras, these magnetic fields. Likewise, there could also be imbalances and blockages that form within the magnetic field itself. And these can also be a source of disease and illness, either psychologically or physically. So when we're diagnosing disease, we actually have to look at both of these domains, the physical and the metaphysical, and also the physical and the magnetic level, electromagnetic level, the aura. So these are things that we're going to be discussing and interfacing with in this article or in this lecture at Manly Halls. And as always, I've broken this lecture down into a bunch of different clips, like over 20 of different ones. And we'll be looking at these one by one, and I'll be commenting and emphasizing certain points along the way. And before we jump in, I also want to emphasize that this topic of the magnetic field and how it serves as an introduction to metaphysics, this whole dynamic is actually the key to understanding astrology. So in terms of astrology, we have the interplay between the planets and the zodiac, and at a higher level of what's called the sidereal zodiac, or the fixed stars. And so these dynamics are actually dynamics of the magnetic field and have to do with how energy moves and the different dynamics involved with energy's motion through these fields as it moves into the physical body. And then the dynamics of the physical body in terms of how it receives these energies, those have to do with the esoteric science of alchemy. So what we're going to be talking about here in this lecture of Manly Halls, or what he's going to be talking about and what I'll be commenting on, very much has to do with how in practice the findings of alchemy and astrology, how these ideas and concepts, how they actually tangibly take place and how we can picture and visualize them. These have to do with the mysteries of space and the mysteries of metaphysics and the mysteries of physical form, the interplay between these different dimensions. And this idea of electromagnetism and the aura are very much involved in the practical aspect of astrology and alchemy. So when you're looking at how the different planets are aligned in different zodiac formations, this has to do with the dynamics of the electromagnetic field and of your aura. And like we were saying, the human mind interfaces at a very intimate level with this aura, and that's why our experience of life is so heavily influenced by these astrological influences. So this is a key to understanding astrology, and you should keep that in mind as we go forward. So without further ado, I'd like to begin this lecture with Manly Hall's introduction to the topic. And he's going to just start off here by introducing magnetism as a topic of study. And he's going to talk about the deep historical roots of the study of magnetism and all the different ways that it's been treated in human history. And he's also going to touch on its connection to this field of esoteric philosophy. So let's jump into Manly Hall's introduction to the lecture.
We have a very interesting subject this morning, and of course, it'll probably be interesting and unsolved when we finish, because it deals with one of the most curious and neglected areas of human research, and that is the magnetic fields, not only of man, but of the universe and of the smallest atom. The beginning of the study of magnetism can be traced back to Egypt, and the staffs and wands of the ancient priests were instruments of magnetic conjuring. Also, we find the Greeks used it, and among the Greeks and early Egyptians, we have the first understanding of the nature of magnetism. It was used principally in healing. It was well known to Pythagoras, who gave us considerable information on the subject, which was promptly forgotten by everybody else. Then we have little knowledge of it, except to the Arabs. The Chinese were aware of it because of the discovery of the mariner's compass. But for the most part, it was neglected until the 17th century, when it became involved in the story of Rosicrucianism. The alchemists, the Rosicrucians, and the Hermetists all were unfolding phases of magnetic theory. The first, probably in more modern times, to use it for healing purposes was Paracelsus of Hohenheim. It was also used strongly by the Rosicrucians and written about in considerable detail by Robert Flood, who was one of the great Rosicrucian apologists. It was also very well known to Athanasius Kircher, the great Jesuit scholar, but for the most part it was ignored. Then we come down a little later and we come upon a curious instrument, Mesmer's magnetic tub. This was a kind of tank in which many people put their feet at the same time and held hands and created a battery out of the water in the tank. It was studied carefully by Cagliostro, It is also known that it interested Saint Germain profoundly, but it annoyed Benjamin Franklin all to pieces. He was never able to like the idea at all. After the developments of mesmer, which were promptly denied by nearly every field of science, the matter dropped into comparative obscurity until more recent times, when within the last 20-25 years it has been revived strongly. And it's this revival that we want to talk about a little this morning, because it is one of the most interesting phases of our study of life.
Okay, in this next clip, we're going to go further into Manly Hall's introduction to the topic, and he's going to specifically here begin to define and explain what magnetism is and how it relates to the human being and the world that we live in. And he's going to relate it to this idea of the aura and how it's like a bubble around the human being, the physical form of the human being.
It is interesting that we should use magnetism so continuously and yet never really understand what it is. The old folks of the Greek and Egyptian period represented the human being as contained within a kind of bubble. This bubble was referred to also by the physician and who did the human atmosphere studies, Dr. Kilner of the University of Liverpool. Incidentally, the magnetic theory is based upon a very simple fact, namely that what we call empty air is not empty at all. It is the most profoundly used all the elements that we know anything about. We all live within air and have our being, and we know that if air fails, we die. But what we do not realize is that air is not just some oxygen or helium or something of this nature. Air is something in itself. It is a substance of itself. It is a substance so real and so important that it's almost impossible to estimate it. It is a tremendous field of magnetic energy. The atmosphere carries the magnetism of the sun. Ptolemy of Alexandria was one of the first to recognize the manifestations or emanations of solar light as containing an energy in addition to merely a luminous factor. The study of the magnetic powers of the sun will be more or less clearly understood by the study of the seasons. Winter, summer, spring, and these things have all to do with a magnetic factor in the air. And we think of it only as in trying to explain it as a physical astronomical phenomena, since as the rotation and revolutions of the sun and planets. But each of these planets is a field of magnetic energy. And this energy comes to us through what we call air.
I want to pause here and just emphasize a quote that he says in this clip. He says, quote, "What we call empty air is not empty at all. It is a substance so real and so important it's almost impossible to estimate it. It is a tremendous field of magnetic energy." So this is really having to do with the idea that the mysteries of astrology have to do with the mysteries of space. And space itself is this dynamic thing that we, in sort of modern materialistic life, we overlook almost entirely and we take for granted. We're so focused on the physical forms that are in space. But when we turn our attention to space, a great mystery begins to be revealed. And we discover that space is not just this empty air that separates physical forms, but that space is actually this dynamic, multidimensional entity that moves from the physical into the metaphysical and then culminates in an abstract field of unified space. So unified space is traditionally what is called spirit and is the home of consciousness. The metaphysical fields that extend inward from this absolute field, these different metaphysical realms are the domain of the soul or the mind. And then these move into and vivify and animate the physical form. On the collective scale, this is the earth, or on the individual scale, it's the human being. And so this is the body. So we have spirit, soul, and body as this trinity. And to really grasp how this trinity manifests in life, we have to gain a newfound appreciation of space. And this newfound appreciation unlocks the meaning of astrology. And actually, he says another quote in this clip that I just played. He says, quote, "The atmosphere carries the electromagnetism of the sun. We tend to think of it only as a physical astronomical phenomenon in terms of the influence of the sun. We tend to only think of it physically, such as the rotation of the sun and of the planets around the sun. But then he says each of these planets is a field of magnetic energy, and this energy comes to us through what we call air." So this idea of space and atmosphere and magnetism and aura, these are the concepts that when we start to factor them in, it completely revolutionizes our understanding of reality and in the way that we as physical beings interface with a larger spiritual universe. Okay, let's go into the next clip. This one is going to be talking about the idea that this atmosphere, this air principle, has a property associated with it that has to do with transmission. And so it's the property of transmission that allows these metaphysical energies to maneuver through the air and focus down onto the physical form. So this is the theme of this upcoming clip.
One thing we have learned from television is that air transmits. We know, for instance, that we can have all kinds of programs on the air at the same time. And they can come from all directions. And they can overlap and interlap. But each one will remain separately identified as though it was moving in a channel or a circuit of its own. And all these scrambling films are working on one atmosphere, and that atmosphere is keeping each one of them in a perfect orbit of its own. You can have a dozen programs, like you turn them on, turn them off, but none of those programs is going through the air in the form we see it. We see the murder committed on the screen, and we see it broadcast into a theater somewhere or into a home. But it isn't the murder that's going into the home. The murder has not been visible when it went through the air. Something went through was vibration. And this vibration in the magnetic field can be divided into an infinite complexity of separate emanations. In other words, if we had 1,000 different channels, they could be differentiated in the magnetic field, so that each one would be broadcast correctly and properly for whatever it is. Thus we realize there's something out there besides air, something besides helium and oxygen, something besides the ordinary factors we take into consideration scientifically. We are in the presence of a mysterious agent, an agent that is part of everything that we are.
So to reemphasize a point he was talking about here about the transmission property of air or the atmosphere or this domain of space, he uses an analogy of a TV or radio antenna and how multiple signals can be broadcasted within the air, and the air or atmosphere carries these signals and then is, the information of each respective signal is channeled down into a receiver that's tuned to the frequency specifically to receive an individual signal. So there's innumerable signals moving through the atmosphere at any one time, but a particular receiver will only be able to receive that which it is attuned to. So that's similar to how this dynamic of the metaphysical energies of space work, is that they're abundant throughout space, sort of all pervading, but the individual life form will only interface with those particular signals that it is designed to be a receiver of. And then you can also, the idea is also related to that, the idea that as the form fine tunes itself and it evolves, it is able to become more and more receptive of certain energies in space. So it can draw them to itself, and it can receive them and serve as an instrument to harness them and manifest them. And he also talks about the role that vibration plays in this process. All right, let's move on to the next clip. This is going into the relationship between human health and electromagnetism. And he's going to talk about how each human body is surrounded by these etheric energy fields.
Now, studying magnetism as it comes into the human body, we've discovered that each human body is surrounded by an etheric or energy field. This energy field is sometimes referred to as an aura, but it is not the true aura that we think of in metaphysics. This magnetic field is an area of energy. This area of energy forms an egg-like atmospheric sheath around the physical body, usually extending 3 to 5 feet from it in each direction. This energy field is the basis of virtue, because this energy field depends for its reality, its serviceability, and its protecting power to mood, emotion, thought, and the attitudes of the person around which this magnetic field is gathered. In other words, the individual, if they are normal, if mentally, emotionally, and physically they are keeping the rules, this magnetic field forms a tremendous protection. It is normal, it is healthy, it is constantly able to handle infections and all kinds of difficulties. It will help to heal wounds. It will help to recover the use of functions and organs. And if we are deprived of some part of the body, it will try to compensate for it. As long as the individual takes proper care of his magnetic field, it will serve him. Now, this is a phase of morality that is generally overlooked. It is assumed that these magnetic fields are something you don't pay much attention to. They're there, maybe they'll help a little. But the truth of the matter is that practically the whole survival of the individual depends upon maintaining the integrity of this flow of energy into the magnetic field. This energy comes from the sun. It comes through a mysterious energy tube in the magnetic field. It enters the individual through the crown of the head. It disseminates through the entire body, and it's excreted back again through the lower centers of the body and is recleansed by the solar energy. This is a kind of a little private tank or capsule of life that we are all carrying about with us all the time.
All right, I want to emphasize a couple things from this clip. He says that the area of energy that surrounds the human being forms an egg-like atmospheric sheath around the body that extends a certain distance. And then he says that this energy field that surrounds the body is this is an important point. It's the basis of virtue, because this energy field depends for its reality or its serviceability and its protecting power. It depends on the disposition and the mood and the emotion and the attitudes of the person that it's flowing into. So the person can block off its fields or its inputs of energy, or it can misuse them. But the idea that there is an ever-present field surrounding the person, that it sets up this innate sense of morality, because what that is morally good, which serves that field and strengthens it and allows its energies to flow freely. And then the inverse is true, that is bad, which denies the energies of that field and blocks them up and misuses them. So that's this it's like an impersonal way of looking at ethics and morality. And if you use this field right, if you serve it, or if you do what's morally good, then it will serve you. And it'll handle infections of the body and other kinds of infirmities, and it'll help to heal wounds. And he also says it helps to recover the use and functions of the organs. But if you don't put yourself in alignment with the needs and properties of this field, then the opposite effect will be true. And it won't serve you, and therefore you won't be able to benefit from its innate healing properties. And then he concludes that practically the whole survival of the individual depends upon maintaining the integrity of this flow of energy into the magnetic field. And he also says that this energy actually comes from the sun. And so the sun is like, as it was anciently considered, the sun is the divine principle and was worshipped as God because it's actually the source of the energies that flow into us. So the sun is this spiritual principle that is actually not to get too deep into it, but the physical sun we see in the sky is actually just a funneling agent for the energies that are associated with space itself. So there's an invisible sun that's actually all encompassing in space. And so our auras descend from this all encompassing field. But when you're tracking someone's astrological chart, the position of the sun is very influential, particularly in terms of the zodiac, in terms of the relationships it forms with the other planets. And that shows you the dynamics that are taking place within your metaphysical aura. So those are important points to consider. In this next clip, he's going to go more into the theme of morality and how it relates to this esoteric science of electromagnetism.
Now, the problem of morality in this is very definite. The moment we break rules, we damage that magnetic flow. We have got to keep the laws of nature, and these in turn are the laws of God, or the magnetic field fails. It can fail because of physical intemperances, which reduce its integrity and reduce its power. It can be wasted in riotous living, which is a common cause these days. It can be variously destroyed by moods, by attitudes, by fears, by complexes. It can be destroyed or damaged by alcohol, drugs, narcotics, all kinds of things. But if this field is damaged, it immediately reacts into health. It damages the individual's vitality. It makes him more easily subject to contagions and infections, and it definitely shortens the life expectancy. Now, if this is so, why do we want to consider it as a moral factor? In other words, what is morality? To the ancients, it was obedience to the words of God, or the laws of God. In more modern times, with more intelligent people, it is obedience with the evident will of deity as manifested in creation. Virtue lies in whatever builds up the magnetic fields. Vice is that which tears them down. No human interception can interfere with this in any way. Therefore, if we are good, it's not because the book says we should be. It's not because it was thundered by the laws on Sinai. It is because we keep the rules of the integration of the human structure, that we use the magnetic fields correctly and protect our health and our happiness and our well-being in that way.
All right, I want to emphasize the main point here from this clip. He says, quote, "Virtue lies in whatever builds up the magnetic fields. Vice is that which tears them down. No human interception can interfere with this in any way." Therefore, meaning no sense of like divine intervention or intercession can overturn this basic cosmic law. And so he says, therefore, if we are good, it's not because the book says we should be. It is not because it was decreed by any law of Sinai, for example. It is because we keep the rules of the integration of the human structure. It is because we use the magnetic fields correctly and protect our health and our happiness and our well-being in that way. So this is a practical approach to morality and ethics. And it's one, so I just want to emphasize, this is a very philosophic interpretation of these topics, but through philosophy, this is a theme I've emphasized a lot in my work. Through philosophy, you can take a scientific analysis of the body and the metaphysical fields and the aura. These things can be studied scientifically. And then you're relating them directly to certain religious concepts like ethics and morality. So philosophy is this synthesizing agent between religion and science. And what it does is it transforms religion into something that interfaces intimately with the natural world so we can better understand the natural world and also understand how our relationship to the natural world ties into topics that religion deals with, like our relationship to the divinity and the relationship between good and evil and things like that. So this is like a transformation of religion. And there's also, approaching it this way opens the door to a new branch of religion, which is a religion as experience, a personal experience. So the idea is if you serve the scientific aspects of these equations, this energy will optimize itself within you. And that doesn't just mean physically, it means mentally. And so as this mental energy optimizes, it expands your experiences of consciousness, and you begin to move further into these metaphysical realms, and you start to experience the type of transpersonal powers and entities and forces that are symbolized in the myths of religion, including an ultimate experience of this field of space, this spiritual field, the plane of consciousness that's absolute, that's sort of associated with the sun. And you can experience that, and that's like an experience of God, or what Carl Jung would call the self, the universal self. So you can have an experience like that you should understand that an experience like that is coming through these aspects that can be understood scientifically that have to do with the mysteries of the mind and how these electromagnetic fields interface with the body, and how certain vibratory states can be achieved within the body and within this field that can unlock these deeper experiences of religious experience, these transcendent experiences of consciousness. These things should not be our understanding of these things should not be mutually exclusive in terms of science is over here and religion's over here. There has to be a grand synthesis between them, and philosophy is the tool that allows this synthesis to take place. All right, having made that point, let's move on and go into another clip of Manly Hall's. He's going to talk here, going now deeper into the physical aspects of how this electromagnetic field interfaces with the body. He's going to talk about how each organ system has its own relationship with these magnetic fields, and that each organ system has its own magnetic field in particular. And this explains something that you find in astrology, which is that different planets and different zodiac signs interface with different organ systems in a particular way. And we also find a teaching in the esoteric approach to not only astrology, but just health in general, that different organ systems are related to different mental capacities. So for example, the liver, the physical organ of the liver, is very much related to your emotions. And that's because there's a correspondence between the physical organ of the liver and the electromagnetic field that it corresponds to your emotional body. So this is the kind of thing that's implied by some of the stuff that Manly Hall is going to be talking about in this next clip.
Now we think of the magnetic field as surrounding the entire structure of the body, as Kilner shows in his work on the human atmosphere, and Babbitt also in his study of the atom. This, however, is only a phase of it. Each part of the body has a magnetic field. Each unit within the individual has its survival in a unit of energy. And this unit of energy is present in the smallest subdivision of imaginable space. It is in the tiniest atom. There is no such a thing as a dead particle in the universe. Even if it is killed by something, the very disintegrating process is a symbol of life energy. Therefore, we are confronted with the natural problem of realizing that virtue is to keep the law of the energy field. Now, the law of the energy field, just by coincidence, is also the law of integrity. The energy field is what establishes right and wrong. The energy field tells us that to lose our disposition and temper fit is wrong. To use various negative, destructive attitudes is wrong. To compromise the principles of right living is wrong. To think badly, to feel unpleasantly, to be engaged in any action or concept which is contrary to the common good damages the magnetic field and therefore is wrong. Selfishness injures that field. Every vice we know, the breaking of any of the 10 Commandments and a number of other rules, results in damage to that field. It has nothing to do with nation. It has nothing to do with the ordinary concepts of codes, because the final code itself is based upon the life principle in each part of the human constitution. So we have each little cell has its own moral responsibilities. The stomach has its own magnetic field. The stomach is not simply an organ. It is an organism. It is a living thing within the human body. The same is true of the heart, the brain, the glandular structure, all the organs, the intestines, all the motor system, the nervous system, the endocrine system. These are all entities. They are entities of magnetic unities. They are part of living organisms which are cooperating together for the common good. To abuse one is to damage all. To neglect one is to neglect all. Each of these organs has its own field in the body. And all these fields together constitute the grand magnetic field that surrounds the complete person.
Okay, in this next clip, he's going to mention Pythagoras and how Pythagoras mentioned in some of his writings about, or some of his teachings that have been passed down, that he, during his travels, extensive initiation experiences, he went to Egypt and found that in some of their mystery school temples, there were constructions of various geometric solids that are associated with sacred geometry, or what Plato, who was also traveled to Egypt, he called the Platonic solids. So Pythagoras reported that as part of the mysteries of human health, that the Egyptian priests, for people who were undergoing various physical or psychological ailments, they would send their patients to the temples that contained these sacred geometries, and the patient would meditate to them. And just the pure act of meditating on the symbol would provide a healing benefit to them. So if we want to understand how and why this could work, we have to go into this back. We have to revisit this idea of the magnetic fields, and also understand that that these different shapes of sacred geometry interface with the energetic dynamics of these magnetic fields. And so each of these magnetic fields has a particular geometric solid associated with it. And so by meditating on these shapes, you work to conform your own magnetic field to the ideal geometric shape that it is designed to operate within. And that's how the healing properties work, is that you help unblock and rectify the geometry of your own electromagnetic field, because you wouldn't be sick unless that had gone out of whack. And so that explains why, at least in part, why these Egyptian temples use this method to promote healing.
Now we go inside of this for a moment to see what we're dealing with. So we go back to Pythagoras, who was very timely in that. He tells us that in Egypt there was a temple in which therapy was the result of this contemplation of symmetrical geometric solids. In other words, the images of therapy were mathematical cubes, octagons, and various forms, dodecahedrons, each one placed upon a kind of altar or pedestal for the contemplation of the sufferer. All were symmetric geometric solids, perfect and complete in structure. To look upon them was therapeutic, because to look upon them accepted their energy as a reality in our lives. Now, these stone solids apparently were not alive. They only gave the impression of value, but actually they were alive. Every form in nature, natural or artificial, has a magnetic field. From the tiniest atom to the greatest galaxy, the magnetic fields are present, and the rules of each of them must be obeyed. Now, if an individual looking at a geometric solid sees in it a perfect proportion, this realization enters into the subconscious life of the person. The imagery of that solid is sent into the consciousness in the form of a benevolent magnetic center. It means that the individual is seeing a harmony, is seeing something in perfect order and perfect correctness. And in visualizing, wherever we see perfection, it improves ourselves. Wherever we accept discord as inevitable, it injures ourselves. Everywhere looking around us in nature, we see that all natural things are benevolent. It is only when these are abused, mostly by humanity, that these benevolences are lost. So we find that we live in a universe in which everything is in harmony if we are.
All right, in this next clip, he's going to talk about how the magnetic field, if it's treated properly, it'll serve as a protective shield over the person.
Now we can state, of course, that somebody else might be out of harmony, and this could injure us. Actually, it's not quite true. The magnetic field which protects us against any negative magnetic field that does not arise within ourselves. We are not contaminated by other people, unless by our very conscious weakness, or our intellectual weakness, or our emotional weakness, we surrender our integrity to the attitudes of other people. If we commit misdemeanors of one kind or another, we are responsible by the effect of these mistakes on our own magnetic field.
In this next clip, Manly Hall is going to go a bit more into the theme of the relationship between a damaged magnetic field and illness. And is also going to talk about how emotional imbalance leads to a type of illness, physical illness, but it also is an illness of itself. So again, there's a close relationship between physical illness and psychological illness, and these have to do with the mysteries of the magnetic field.
Now, the magnetic field not only covers this type of thing, but it covers elimination, the intestinal walls. All of this type of thing is damaged, as we know, by hysteria, by various moods. The individual becomes ill because of a bad disposition. Now, we consider this to be just symbol of something that happens that way, but it is not. The individual who is sickened by dispositional fault is sickened because he has damaged the magnetic field of some essential part of his own nature. If he has damaged the magnetic field of his digestive system, he will have dyspepsia. And if the dyspepsia lasts long enough, and the magnetic field is thickened long enough, then long enduring chronic ailments can set in. No individual actually is infected entirely from himself, but never completely without himself. All of these unities of facts must be in harmony.
In this next clip, he's going to talk a little bit about the magnetic field and its relationship to alchemy. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but alchemy has to do with how energies are received and put into work. And so if the alchemy is off, or the chemistry is off of the physical form, it won't be able to properly receive the energies that are moving into it from the magnetic field. And so so alchemy is about optimizing the physical form and the various elements of the compound so that it can process and receive all of the energies moving into it. And so therefore, you should understand that alchemy never exists independently of astrology. The two go hand in hand, because astrology has to do with the incoming motions of energies through these magnetic fields, and alchemy has to do with the organism's capacity to receive and utilize these energies.
Now, in the Rosicrucian philosophy, we had alchemy, the transmutation of various phases of life. Alchemy was a transformation and a transmutation of energies. And these energies are essentially the same ones that we have in magnetism. We therefore have the constant realization that everything we do and everything that we see and have has values of its own.
All right, now he's going to talk a little bit about how the various kingdoms of life, how the evolution of these various kingdoms, meaning the mineral kingdom or the plant kingdom or the animal kingdom, how each of these evolves in relation to these magnetic fields. So the overall magnetic field of the Earth or of the solar system at a greater scale, but the overall magnetic field of those things evolves through these subsidiary magnetic fields. And that each of these subsidiary magnetic fields has or moves into each of these specialized kingdoms of nature, and they sort of hones in on them, and they specialize. These fields are specialized around what he calls a magnetic core. So each kingdom has its own magnetic core, and likewise each species has its own magnetic core, And then at a smaller scale, each individual organism has its own magnetic core. So there's this fractal quality. And just keep in mind this Hermetic axiom of as above, so below. That conveys that same idea of like fractal organization.
Now let us pick up a pebble from the beach, and we suddenly realize that we're in the presence of a little stone. Today there is quite an interest in little stones, all kinds of stones. We are interested in the crystals that form in rocks and all these types of things. But crystals are formed by magnetism. They are formed by a rate of vibration peculiar to a certain element. And that particular rate of vibration can evolve through the mineral, plant, vegetable, and animal. It is always present. There is a magnetic core on each kingdom, and each kingdom unfolds within this magnetic field. And within each of the composite fields, individual members of the field, with various degrees of growth, are variously individually conditioned. Everywhere, this process of keeping faith with integrity becomes the natural secret of security, survival, and world peace.
In this next clip, he's going to talk a little bit more about how each individual organism or each individual form within creation has a magnetic or interfaces with this idea of electromagnetism and magnetic fields and auras, and that even a thing like an individual potato has a magnetic field. And so this is just kind of emphasizing the universality of these principles. And this idea also goes into the mysteries of nutrition, because when we eat food and assimilate food, we're not just assimilating the physical minerals, but we're also ingesting the magnetic field. And that's a very important point that has to be understood and taken into the future if we're ever going to address the ongoing health crises that we have. And if we're ever going to optimize the human form, we have to understand the interface between nutrition and magnetism.
Now, we can say that it would be very unlikely that we'll say a potato could have a magnetic field of its own, but it does. In fact, every cell within the potato has a magnetic field of its own. Therefore, we come into the problem of nutrition. And nutrition is very largely the study of the magnetic fields of various food products. It also tells us what happens when these food products are adulterated or are variously misused or poisonous elements are introduced into them. All this is part of a mystery that is solved in magnetism. We pass laws against these misuses, but we fail to realize that it is not just the physical factor that we have to work with. The physical factor is only a fragment of it.
In this next clip, he's going to make some of the points I was talking about earlier about how important philosophy is in terms of teaching us how to marry the religious and science aspects. So, in other words, if we want to ever optimize our energy fields, which is really a scientific idea, we need philosophy to give these fields a reason that we should want to optimize them. They have to have some kind of meaning associated with them. They have to have an experiential quality associated with them. And so that's where religion comes in. So philosophy is this key element. And one of my big theses that I talk about in my Manly Hall book, which is available on Amazon now, you should check it out if you haven't already. It's called Manly P. Hall, the Maestro of Esoteric Philosophy. But one of the points I make in the last couple of chapters of that book is to really hone in on this trinity between philosophy, religion, and science, and talk about how philosophy is this great missing element in human life today. When we think of philosophy, typically today, we kind of get lost in this babble of opinion about what it means. And there's all these different schools of philosophy, and they argue for all these different things. And so I argue that we should go back to the source of the philosophical teachings. Particularly the word philosophy comes from Pythagoras. And Pythagoras existed at the same time that Gautama Buddha existed, Lao Tzu, and a number of other world teachers. And together, this whole cohort of world teachers, which came onto the scene around 600 BC, these were the first exponents of philosophy. And so when we have to look back to what they taught about what philosophy means and how it's supposed to be practiced, and that gives us a gold standard to cut through the confusion of what we are experiencing today. So in that way, we can take this renewed concept of vitality that's now been sort of cleansed of all this confusion. We've gone back and found the gold standard definition. Now we can take that and bring that back into modern life today and use it as this resource that has been given to us, by our ancestors, but also by the gods. You could say that this is the teachings of philosophy are like a divine revelation. They have to do with the laws and mysteries of existence, and like I said, marrying science and religion together. So we take this sacred body of teachings, and we have been completely ignoring. And if we start to appreciate them again, and we start to discipline ourselves to them, and if we create, this is critical, we create an institution to embody these teachings, which is what the mystery schools of antiquity used to do. So if we reinvigorate, rediscover, and resurrect the mysteries, and create that again as a public-facing institution, and we kickstart once again the institution of initiation grounded in these philosophic principles. If we can do these things, then we can really make a huge leap and turn a lot of the problems that we're facing. We can turn them around. So that's my thesis. That's what I argue. And so he's going to be touching on a little bit of this in this upcoming clip, and then just specifically relating the importance of philosophy to this idea of magnetic fields that we've been dealing with.
The main problem is to realize that behind all of these problems, whether of government or of religion or of philosophy, all these things are in trouble because of lack of integrity. And integrity is simply keeping the laws and rules of energy fields. Each field has its own integrities. All integrities in all fields are compatible. All lack of integrities, all departures from integrity in any or all fields are in conflict constantly. The only way the individual can escape conflict is by never abusing the energy factors of his own life. He must never abuse his body, his emotions, or his mind. He must never permit himself to develop attitudes that are incompatible with the integrities which nature has bestowed. The magnetic fields are absolutely honest. There is no possible way of making them dishonest. The only thing we can do with them is to destroy or limit the manifestation of their integrity. If we break the rule, we lose the benefit of that particular energy. When we lose that benefit, we then say that evil has come to us. But it is not an evil thing that has come to us. It is the failure of a good thing to be developed and purified and intensified. Now, the elementary fields, the magnetic fields, are also in a state of constant evolution. They're in evolution in the life of the person. The individual may be born on a certain level of magnetic integrity. If he becomes a better person, he strengthens these values in himself, because actually it is all a matter of gradually strengthening the perfection of an energy resource. Now, no one is going to perfect it in one life or 100 lives maybe, but it's going to grow. And the more integrity grows, the more rapidly the individual becomes harmoniously adjusted to the principle of life to which he belongs. In our world at the present time, we're in a sad state in which practically everyone has broken every conceivable rule. We are living day by day trying to live off the profits from our own mistakes, and this is not really profitable. We are not realizing that this has nothing to do primarily with the theology. This has nothing to do with laws of government. This has nothing to do actually with our legal codes. It has to do with the relationship of energy to its proper ends and purposes.
In the next clip, he's going to talk about how magnetic fields interact across various domains, like across kingdoms or across species or across organisms. And he's going to basically imply that there is a chemistry, a divine harmony that's supposed to bind all of these together into a unified whole. And that when any one part goes awry, then the whole harmony of the total organism is compromised. So this can have to do with the Earth ecosystem, but it can also have to do with the individual organism, and like the balance between organ systems, or the balance between various electromagnetic levels, like the emotional body and the mental body and the what's called the astral body. You know, all of these, for the system to work optimally, each individual component has to be optimized, but they also have to be working in a divine chemistry with each other. So it's this very dynamic factor that we have to learn how to master to sort of fulfill our own evolution. And this has to do with, again, mastering alchemy, the interplay between alchemy and astrology.
Everything that has an existence has a magnetic field. It may have one that is not even visible. And the whole of our atmosphere, the whole of the world in which we live, is one mass of magnetic interplays. But as long as these are kept honest, they are all compatible. And a universe in which there was no dishonesty would be free from every infirmity. But it's not possible as yet to achieve to this. But we can achieve to varying degrees of it, and we can exceed and excel the amount we are born with if we decide to stay with it for the duration of our lives. Therefore, again, everything becomes a matter of keeping the energy fields clean. And the only way they can be kept clean is by using them properly. Now, two people watching a golf game may see the same game. One is interested merely in the fact that it is a recreation. The other person may be very competitive, determined to win at all costs, and perfectly willing to cheat a little if it can win quicker. In the first place, the energy is perfectly okay. The vibrations are normal. But in the second, ulterior motives have entered into the playing of the game. And this is something that is troubling us throughout the sports world at the present time. Practically every sport has been commercialized. And by commercialization, we simply mean that it is no longer a sport, but a means of profit to some and loss to others. The moment this happens, the magnetic field is tainted. And from that time on, everyone who takes on the negative attitude damages himself.
All right, in this next upcoming clip, he's going to emphasize the idea that the magnetic field of the Earth is a unified whole. This is something I talked about a little bit about earlier, but we have to treat things, we really have to focus in on this relationship between parts and wholes. So there's a unified whole, that's really the solar system, and the Earth is a lesser whole. And mankind is also collectively a whole, and part of our nature is in the solar orb, and part of our nature is in the Earth, the globe of the Earth. And so we're crucified between these two polarities, and so we're crucified between this polarity of higher and lower, or spirit and matter. But each of these levels, the solar, the Earth, and the human, each of these is a whole, and they all these three different primary wholenesses interface with each other, and then each has its own subsidiary parts, and each of these parts interfaces with each other. So there's this complex dynamic taking place. But if we really want to understand this subject, we have to learn to discipline our mind to think in this certain relationship pattern of whole and part, and also triangulation. Because the triangulation between the solar and the Earth and the human, that's one of the primary trinities that you're going to deal with in philosophy. So, and if you can do that, it's going to help you make sense of the world. So anyway, he's going to go into a little bit of that in this upcoming clip. Again, using the analogy of radio station and broadcasting and transmission of signals through the atmosphere.
Television transmission is a work achieved by energy. There is an energy field, and it is unfolding and developing in a larger energy field. The atmosphere through which these messages pass is itself a great field of light, and it is alive. Space is alive. Space is not merely some atoms alive in a vacuum. Space itself, as a substance and essence, is part of the great magnetism of the sun. Now we have here all these stations broadcasting on their own wavelengths. Now into this magnetic field, which we call the atmosphere, is dumped a conglomerate you wouldn't believe. There's all kinds of things. Not only the conglomerate of the television, but the conglomerate of senates and houses of representatives and the various governments, religions pouring their influences into it. This atmosphere, which we can see right through if it isn't for the smog, is continuously being filled with something. And yet, with all that, this thing which we call atmosphere is able to differentiate those stations so perfectly that what you see here will go through that air, and it will come out again in another receiving set, proving conclusively that in its entire transmission, perhaps around the world, it was never for one moment deprived of its integrity or its individuality. It was never massed into other things. Now, occasionally we make a mistake and try to put too many things on one channel, but that is up to us. If we do it right, there'll always be a channel for anything we want to channel that way. But it will always come through, although it is coming through a medium which we can't see, and at any point along the way there's no program noticeable, no program possible. But at a proper point, a receiving station can recreate that particular program in all its detail, although it was passed through maybe thousands of miles of so-called empty atmosphere.
I just want to emphasize once more here that one of the key quotes he just said is that the atmosphere through which these messages pass is itself a great field of life. And it is alive. Space is alive. Space is not merely some atoms alive in a vacuum. Space itself is a substance. So space is this whole that I was talking about, this wholeness, but it has these different subsidiary parts to it, which are these different metaphysical fields. But you can't get trapped up in thinking about the interplay between these magnetic fields without fundamentally grounding your understanding that these different parts are all parts of one subsidiary whole. So each has a particular service that it's giving that whole. And so you have to understand the function of each part based on how it's relating to the whole. And it's the same thing on the level of the microcosm, the individual human being. You can only optimize your different parts of yourself if you understand how each part is meant to serve the whole. And if you can understand that relationship, then you can start to understand how each part is supposed to relate to each other. Because ideally, each part will optimize how the other parts interface with the whole. And so that's the dynamic. Kind of building on these same themes. In this next clip, Manly Hall is going to talk about the idea of psychic pollution and how this affects the collective magnetic supersystem. So this is an idea a little bit about how an idea like mass psychological contagion can take place. And this is something I talked about in the work that I've done on depth psychology, which I wrote about and published in a book I did a couple years ago called Psychology, the Science of the Soul. I have physical copies for sale of this for a while on my website. I've taken those down because I don't have the physical copies with me anymore. So those aren't for sale right now, but I am going to post the PDF soon to my Substack for subscribers of this publication. And in this publication, I do a case study of 2020 and show how astrologically certain alignments that took place, planetary alignments, particularly those involving Pluto and Saturn, how the themes of that alignment played out in real time in the world. And relating to this idea of electromagnetic fields, you can look at that case study that I did in that work. And I also have some podcast episodes in my archive around the publication I put out. So I discussed these topics on the podcast. If you go back to, I think it was like fall 2021 when I put this out. If you go back, then you can hear my analysis of this. And so now relating this to the topic that we're talking about today, that alignment, those astrological alignments that took place represent certain critical states that were achieved in the collective electromagnetic field. And those critical states in the collective field ended up activating certain dynamics within each person's individual magnetic field. So in other words, you have a mass psychological transformation taking place in the collective magnetic field, and that reverberates down into each individual that's a part of that magnetic field, and that's every human being. And so we each had a reaction against this collective transformation that took place associated with the conjunction of Pluto, Saturn, and actually Jupiter and Mars. It was all aligned in early 2020, right at the same time that the global lockdown and the whole pandemic rolled out. And the psychological phenomena associated with those events are very much an expression of an imbalanced magnetic field and a sort of reaction counter reaction relationship that took place. And the whole thing was catalyzed by these collective transformations in the shared magnetic field of humanity and of the earth. So another thing that you should understand is that the actual pandemic agenda and whatever institutions that were behind that or involved in carrying it out, those individual institutions also have magnetic fields that interface with this collective field of the earth. And so it's not a coincidence or a mistake that a sort of deep state action like that would coincide with a Pluto-Saturn conjunction, because the Pluto-Saturn conjunction very much has to do with unearthing of the shadow, and particularly the way that the mass of collective humanity reacted to the vaccines and the mandates, and also the anti-vaxxers as being sort of vilified. All that stuff has very much to do with the shadow complex. That's part of the analysis I did in my publication. And so the actual mechanism of action for how a collective astrological event can manifest into a mass psychological shadow triggering event, the actual mechanism of action is this electromagnetic field dynamic that we've been talking about. So anyway, in this upcoming clip, Manly Hall is going to talk about how psychic pollution can be triggered by something like a Pluto-Saturn conjunction. He's not going to mention that specifically, but that conjunction really represents a collective magnetic event in the super system, in the magnetic field of the Earth, the aura. And to the extent that that type of event happens in an environment where there's a lot of psychic pollution on the planet, meaning a lot of mental imbalance in humanity, both individually and collectively, there's going to be a intense reaction there. The chemistry is combustive, and that's exactly what we experienced playing out in that moment in time, and that has continued forward to this day. Because the thing about a conjunction is that it's the beginning of a cycle. So the themes and events that were catalyzed with that initial conjunction in 2020 are going to play out in a cycle of and culminate in the next conjunction between those planets that takes place. And then in between now and then, there's a bunch of critical periods that have to do with trines and squares and things like that. And just to tie it back to our topic, all those things have to do with the electromagnetic field. That's the mechanism of action for how these things are actually carried forth. It has to do with our aura and the metaphysical fields that surround the earth and the human being.
So we have all this proof that there is something out there in space. Now that what's out there in space is also subject to toxin. We can say that some broadcasts are toxic. We can say that anything that goes through that space, which by vibratory rate is not good, is damaging not only itself, but its recipients, and is also poisoning the channel. As long as we have corrupt patterns, as long as aggressive commercialism, as long as corruption is indulged in over the airways, we will have magnetic sickness in the air. We will have it in the air, and it will permeate our homes, our families, our governments, and our nations. We will sicken that level through which that particular energy flows, so that the energies that we use for communication have their own sicknesses. They have their own vibratory rates. The corruption of a communication media does not mean that the individual will have a complete collapse of his system. It will mean only that that part of his system which is turned into that community medium will be damaged. He can go right on, go to church, and build up that one. For the meantime, however, the television is tearing down another energy field. Now, as you tear down these energy fields, which most people don't even know exist or believe in, you are also opening yourself to all kinds of sickness and also all kinds of moral energy decay. You are opening yourself to the corruptions of the life principles which are necessary to maintain you. The moment you damage a level of integrity in your own magnetism, that level of integrity becomes sick. The moment that becomes sick, part of the defense against exterior problems is reduced. The only way in which the individual can be really dominated by anything except himself is when he sells out his own energy and becomes negative to other things. He has to relinquish his own integrity before he can be damaged by outside forces. There isn't enough evil in all the world to destroy the integrity of one person. He must destroy it himself, or compromise it, or relax it, or be talked into something. But it has to be his own action. Therefore, the damages are, in a sense, not only moral, but are absolutely just in their actual integrities. And this is the way in which, apparently, as the Chinese noted, the universe creates the concept of right and wrong. This right and wrong is simply a matter of what builds up and what tears down the essential energies upon which life depends. So we have this problem in every field of life. We have it in the narcotics problem. We have it in a large part of commercialism. We have it wherever there is an attitude of putting profit in advance or over integrity. Wherever the individual makes this compromise, he immediately becomes a part of this particular problem.
I want to emphasize just one point he made in this clip. He said there isn't enough evil in all the world to destroy the integrity of one person. He must destroy it himself. Or compromise it, or relax it, or be talked into something, but it has to be his own action. And so this, again, interfaces with the science of morality and ethics. Because this electromagnetic field keeps the score, and there's no cheating it, and there's no getting around it. You have to serve it and cultivate it and strengthen it, and it has to be by a deliberate action. So that's the theme there. Let's move on. In the next clip, he's going to talk about how, just building on what we were talking about, how the just individual, or the morally superior individual, can stay immune from his toxic psychological environment. And yeah, this is just building on those previous themes.
Now, 99 people may take it on and damage themselves, but 100th person who does not take it on does not damage themselves, simply because the others do. The idea that damage is contagious, or actually infectious, is only true if the individual who is the recipient is basically inconsistent with integrity themselves. There is no reason why anyone should recognize the fact that another person is capable of contributing to their delinquency. For it is said definitely that many may fall upon the right hand and many upon the left hand, but the just person shall not be moved. We are all, therefore, wrong when we say that civilization is destroying us. That is not true. What is destroying us is our acceptance into our own inner life of the shortcomings and mistakes that we associate with civilization.
All right, here's the key point. He said there towards the end, he said, quote, "We are all therefore wrong when we say that civilization is destroying us. That is not true. What is destroying us is our acceptance into our own inner life of the shortcomings and mistakes that we associate with civilization." So again, the immoralities and toxicities and imbalances of the collective field can't harm us unless we become receptive to them. And then they can play out. And this, again, has to do with some of the mysteries of astrology, because it has to do with the role that free will plays in the reality that planets and stars and zodiac signs do have an influence. And the qualities associated with them will manifest in your life. Like, you can't get around that truth. If you have a certain conjunction going on in your life, its themes will reverberate within your life in some form. What you do have control over is how you respond to those themes. So there's this idea that the influence of the stars or the planets impel, but they do not compel. Meaning you do have a choice in how you react to the input of these forces. And this has to do with alchemy, you can transmute them into a positive expression, or you can allow yourself to be controlled by them. And it has to do with how you become receptive to these influences. So you can't change the influences that are acting on you from the electromagnetic field in terms of how it interfaces with the collective field, but you can control the soundness and equilibrium and harmony of your own personal magnetic field through deliberate work. And in that way, you can control how you respond to these influences when they do show themselves. So, like in 2020, Pluto Saturn was going to affect everybody in their own way. But, and again, the themes had to do with a lot of shadow surfacing. But your own maturity and the own stability of your own magnetic field and the work that you've done there very much had a role to play in how that Pluto Saturn energy manifested in your life. And so, that's an important thing. There's also this interplay between the collective conjunction taking place and then where Pluto and Saturn are in your personal chart. And that also influences the chemistry, and also what zodiac sign those are in. That'll give you more information about where particularly, what aspect of your life those influences will be coming in. And so there's, astrology gets really dynamic, and I think you really have to be a master of philosophy to be a really good astrologer. And I think you should be forewarned if you are consulting an astrologer or you yourself are a practicing astrologer giving advice to other people. You should be humble to the fact that there are so many dynamics involved with astrology that inform how these forces play themselves out, that you should never make the mistake of thinking that your reading of a chart is complete or absolute unless you are a true master of philosophy and you've incorporated the solar and lunar aspects and you have an understanding of the sidereal, fixed stars. There's so many different elements that come into play. And so just be very humble when you're reading these things, and just keep the humility of a student, that you're still a student and you're just trying to use these to help inform yourself, but just don't get dogmatic about what your reading is or a reading that you have been given, because almost certainly it's going to be incomplete in some important way or something will be missing. And so none save a true master can really have a full synthesis of a chart, and just be aware of that. All right, coming up next, Manly Hall is going to be talking about how the philosophy of magnetism must be incorporated into our approach of art, engineering, design, and government. Meaning the standards that we use to evaluate whether or not something has a good design in terms of a piece of art or the architecture of a building, that these criteria should interface with the science of electromagnetism. Because if a building, like a brutalist creation, like the reason it has a disharmonious effect on us is because it doesn't properly serve the electromagnetic field of itself or the beings around it. Like we said, each form that we create has its own field associated with it. That's not just a thing like a potato has a field, but also the things that we intentionally design have their own field around them. So we can design something that has a harmonious field, or we can do the opposite and create something that's inharmonious. And so the goal should be to create something that's harmonious. And if it is harmonious, that gives it an objective standard of being beautiful. The things that are beautiful is that which is in harmony. And so these what we consider intangible qualities actually can't have an objective standard once we factor in these things like sacred geometry and electromagnetism and metaphysics, because that's where these things like beauty actually have a set defined definition. And so he's going to talk a little bit about that here.
So we go on a little further into something else, the arts. Every picture that we see has a magnetic field. The fact that it apparently is a work of art on canvas or carved in wood and stone does not affect the fact that every form that is integrated is alive. And every form that is alive because of factors brought together in a certain specific pattern. In the case of a painting, it is the life in a canvas, the life in a frame, the life in each twisted tube, and then in the life of the artist. And the object of the picture. Everything is made up of living elements. This idea that everything is dead, that can't run around, is a mistake. Everything is alive that can be seen. A chair is alive because it has a magnetic field. And this magnetic field changes with every chair. And yet there is always this problem of what is right and what is wrong. A good chair will always have a good magnetic field. A chair which we destroy by misuse will be destroyed, and we will suffer in our magnetic field for this act of destruction. Everyone is responsible for the destruction or the mistake that he causes. And in every case, the object of that mistake is either nullified or broken down or discredited in some way. And if the picture is good, and the painting is good, and the carving is proper, these all add to the goodness of things. If an artist, however, starts a career of corrupt art, he is damaging his own magnetic field, and he is damaging the magnetic field of those who approve of what he has done and accept it. That is the reason why the censorship of integrity is important to art, music, and every other field, because it is part of the inevitable laws of life. Wherever integrity is damaged, the one who causes the damage is the primary one who must pay. And if the individual causes his own damage, then he is the one that must pay for it. But the damage is not in the building or in the rock or in the stone. It is in the magnetic field. It is in that part of ourselves which we depend upon to maintain our various integrities. Today, neurosis and other emotional ailments are very frequent, and we have to give considerable thought, therefore, to the causes of these things. We look around us and we see a generation which has lost all sense of value because it doesn't even believe in value. It also has been corrupted by the example of a previous generation that has torn down most of the ideals and dreams with which the civilization has been built. The only way we can really get to this would be through a reorganization of our science of energies. We would have to have a full and scientific study of all of the energy fields that are involved in human life. We would have to therefore come to the conclusion that there is no problem in which these fields can be evaded. And as these fields are all essentially right, and the diversion of this, something else, is wrong, we then have the basic value of virtue, the basic value of doing it right in the first place, or what we might call a reformation. A reformation is nothing but a reform of the use of available energy. Everything is energy. Atomic bombs are energy. The oil spill in Alaska is energy, waste energy, and abusive energy. All these things. And they all arise from something being wrong in the integrities of life. We have compromised principle by going away from the energy values.
Just want to emphasize something he says here. He says the only way we can really get to a rejuvenation of civilization is through a reorganization of our science of energies. And he says we have to have a full and scientific study of all the energy fields that are involved in human life. So philosophy is necessary to that because it puts science on its right footing and it connects it to religious meaning and purpose. And so philosophy is a necessary ingredient, like I said before, that we're missing. And if we can incorporate it, then this whole realm of metaphysics can be opened up to us and we can understand it. Not even this idea that we need to reinvent the wheel and discover it for the first time. Philosophy gives us this whole lineage of teachings and resources that we can study and learn and bring to the table. And they'll give us the keys to unlocking the knowledge that we need to have and the wisdom and intelligence we need to have to rejuvenate our civilization. You know, the resources we need are not ones that haven't already been bestowed to us. They have been bestowed to us. And what we need to do is humble ourselves to the wisdom of the ancients, in particular the old philosophic schools and the mystery schools, rediscover their teachings, and then apply them to the state of modern knowledge and modern scientific knowledge today. So that's a key point that's important to me. I want to emphasize. In the next clip, Melhan is going to talk a little bit about the Buddhist idea of the heart doctrine and how it interfaces with this topic of magnetism.
So we go back to the individual now, and we find him standing in the midst of his own magnetic field, with his structure protected by the constant radiating force of outflowing energy, an outflowing energy that vitalizes everything from the center outward and nourishes the solar system, which is the human body, from the level of the sun, as in astronomy. The source of all the energy fields in the human body is the heart. That this is the thing from which all else radiates. Therefore, the most dangerous of all corruption is the abuse of love, abuse of friendship, abuse of integrities, abuse of fidelities, and abuse of those things of benevolence, mercy, and compassion, which are associated with the heart. As those energies remain firm, the heart radiating out to the circumference of the magnetic field of the body is completely protective. It would be practically impossible for anything to damage it in the area where it is functioning properly. There may be other functions which is not yet perfected, but if the individual is basically honorable, he will be able to perfect these without too much trouble. Actually, however, if these energies are wrong, if the individual begins to hate somebody, or an individual breaks a friendship from selfishness, or an individual breaks his friendship for advantage or gain, for physical or economic gain, immediately this defense is down. The individual who cheats has lowered his defenses against being cheated in his own turn. Everything, if he does an evil, he opens the way for an evil to be done to him, because he has destroyed the magnetic defenses. Now, you can't say where those defenses are. They are invisible, but they are very real. They are real, and they represent an actual flow of energy.
So to revisit a point I made earlier, I talked about how each being and each kingdom and each form within nature, at whatever scale, has a electromagnetic core around which the auras and the fields concentrate and circulate. And in the human being, this core is the heart. So that's the heart doctrine, is to have the mind and the animal force of the body to bring these into discipline through the heart. And the heart provides the balancing equilibrium agent to align the mind and the physical force of the physical body. In the next clip, he's going to talk about magnetism and how it relates to healing, but also what in ancient times would be like magical phenomenon, are things that harness the mysteries of the magnetic field, and by deliberately manipulating the magnetic field, you can exert an influence on the physical world. And in some cases, this could be used for like spontaneous healing, or what we call like a miraculous healing, when the true source of this miraculous healing is to be found in the magnetic field. So he's going to talk a little bit about that in the relationship between these in the next clip, and talk a little bit about Paracelsus and how he used talismans and things like that, different metals, to exert what at the time appeared to be miraculous healing, but actually these things were very targeted in a esoteric scientific way to interface with the magnetic field and to correct imbalances which in the magnetic field, and to increase the alchemy of transmission between the field and the body.
Now, in the Middle Ages, we had magic come into this too. And we realized something that's seemingly coming back to us today. Namely, that inanimate objects have magnetic fields. Therefore, stones, trees, everything we can think of is subject to magnetic existence. And these magnetic existences are radiant. They convey meaning and value in all directions. Paracelsus made such a point of certain talismans and things of that nature, because he believed that they had to do with the magnetic field. He lived in Switzerland, where the dew is very heavy, and he put glass plates out on little stands, and on these glass plates at night, under certain positions of the planets and the moon, he gathered the dew, impregnated with the vibrations of the planetary positions at the time of the exposure. These materials he bottled and labeled exactly as he would an ordinary medication. And he gave these to the sick when an ailment arose that required this type of medication. He therefore developed something that was almost the same as a very high degree of homeopathy, where natural remedies derived directly from nature without conditioning of any kind were suitable to correct certain difficulties which might arise from the depletion of natural resources.
In this next clip, he's going to talk a little bit more about something that we've already discussed, and he already discussed in this lecture, which is the relationship between magnetism and art, engineering, design, and government, and how these human institutions and human activities must be influenced and informed by philosophy. And when they are informed by philosophy, that opens the door to this whole mysterious world of metaphysics to come in and transform how we approach these things.
Every building, every church is a living entity. Every bank is a living entity. Every war office is a living entity. These things are not merely buildings. They are embodiments of attitudes. Everything is alive with the quality for which it was created. The war office is tied to war. The bank is tied to banking. But banking is a living fact. It is the banking that is the real living involvement in the so-called story of banking. These things are all alive. And each one of these, as it comes into life, is born with a certain responsibility. A bank is part of an organization, part of an entity, part of something created for a purpose. Now, if the bank fulfills this purpose honorably, it is then healthy. If, on the other hand, it decides to make an unreasonable profit, if it decides to sacrifice its integrity for the advancement of its own institutional existence, there is trouble. The bank will ultimately go broke. The stock exchange, when it was created to help farmers and merchants to share their goods and make proper and reasonable investments, as they all sat together under a tree in the south end of New York, if this institution had remained a benevolent organization of service, it would be still probably very practical and very useful. But instead of being that, it has now become a structure of misuses and abuses. And the result is it is gradually destroying itself. Now, a republic is an entity. It is a magnetic field. An autocracy is a field. A monarchy is a field. A communistic institution is a field. Every one of these organizations use energy. They use it in 1,000 different ways. Political speeches, harangues on the street corners, battles in the galleys and back roads. Everything is involved. And every one of these energy fields that becomes corrupted in any form or in any way is doomed to disaster. Therefore, our code of honor is not based upon the Mosaic code alone, although that is a very good one. It is actually based upon use and abuse.
All right, in this next clip, he's going to talk about, again, a theme that we've discussed to some degree already, which is how the misuse of energy corrupts the magnetic field, and this sets the stage for the inevitable destruction of the organism. And by implication now is that we live in a society or a civilization that is systematically misusing energy, psychologically and physically, and how this inevitably is setting up for the destruction of the civilization. And this, as long as this process continues unabated, the motion towards self-destruction will increase. So what we really actually need or what's required is, this is kind of a fine point, so let me thread my way through it. All religions talk about how there's an Armageddon that sets the stage for a coming of the Messiah. So in a sense, what we're experiencing now is the Armageddon. And the coming of the Messiah, the key point that we have to realize is that the Messiah is not going to come in an individual human being in the way that Christianity considers like Jesus Christ. There's one divine person that'll come and save us. The Messiah is actually the institution of philosophy, in my opinion, because that's the God-given doctrine of teachings that when we learn and internalize them, they become the vehicle of our own salvation. And so the restoration of the mysteries and the resurrection of philosophy and the reappreciation of the mysteries of our own history and the God-given wisdom teachings that have been provided to us, and also how those wisdom teachings open up our understanding of the world into this dynamic concept of spirit and space and consciousness and metaphysics and the aura and magnetism. All these things, when these come in as active factors in human life, it'll totally transform our relationship with life and with each other and with our relationship to the earth and the cosmos as a whole. And that will set us on a new trend, a new trajectory, both individually and collectively, that will get us out of this morass that we're in. And it will give us the tools and intelligence to take this process of self-destruction that's continuing, and we can transmute it in an alchemical fashion, and thereby facilitate the evolution of ourselves and of the earth. And that's our ultimate spiritual purpose in life. The human organism, the human species, the human kingdom in nature has this purpose of becoming the alchemist and transmuting. And so this is all part of our growth process, going through this stage that we're in, this Armageddon. And so, in my view, and in Manly Hall's teachings, philosophy is this saving force, this messianic force. It's not an individual person, but it's a collective awakening. And, the Messiah is a universal force, and the resurrection of philosophy and the mysteries will bring that force into life on this earth. But we also have to participate in it. So this idea of like Jesus Christ coming and saving us is something we don't have to take responsibility for us. Somebody else will come and save us. Like, that's the thing we have to grow out of, that idea. And that's why I think the resurrection of an institution of philosophy that requires us to do much and go through initiation and learn his teachings, but also overcome trials and tests. That's the human way of evolution, as I argue. So he's going to get into a little bit of that in this upcoming clip, but specifically focusing on the idea that the misuse of energy brings about the destruction of a system.
There is no possibility of an abuse succeeding. It will seem to succeed for a little while. It will succeed in the same way that an abuse of the body will apparently provide the individual with an opportunity to make very serious mistakes. But in the end, the energy fields pay the bill. Every misuse of life responsibility, use of basic materials, the abuse of forests, the abuse of water, the corruption of air, all these things are paid for in magnetic defects. And we are beginning to recognize them now. We are wondering why some of these strange things happen that have been happening in the last few years. Nuclear fission is a great tragedy, not because it simply offends the peace-loving human being, but because it is a misuse, a violent corruption of energy. It is the use of a divine power to injure other people. Therefore, that which lives by the sword must perish by the sword. So our whole morality is a matter of life energies. It is a matter of gradually bringing all our intemperances into patterns of usefulness and creativeness and constructiveness. It is the gradual victory of friendship over animosity. It takes the stranger out of existence and puts the friend in its place. Everything is part of working towards a harmonious balance of the natural resources of the solar power. Everything can be used to advance the common good, but everything that is used to destroy will be destroyed by its own destructiveness within itself. Every person will have to decide whether he is going to fulfill his own purposes or whether he is going to obey the laws of nature. If he obeys the laws of nature and understands them, things will be solved. If he keeps on doing as he pleases with no consideration for values or for the rights and purposes of nature, he will be in trouble.
Okay, in the next clip here, and we are nearing sort of the end. I have a few left, actually about 6. But we have here in this next clip, Manly Hall is going to talk about the esoteric science of meditation and how it interfaces with magnetism.
Now we have now considerable emphasis upon the creation of new energy symbols. And this is more or less an interesting phase of our problem. The ancients used all kinds of symbolic designs to indicate energy. They had their pentacles and their signs and their symbols and their images. And in metaphysical thinking and philosophical thinking, there was a great emphasis upon meditation and the mantras and mudras of the esoteric doctrines. These are very important. But now comes the question. Meditation is a mood for the distribution of energy. The power of meditation has to do with the use of magnetic energy. Therefore, the problem of meditation is very simple. You say to yourself, I want to develop a higher grade or higher level of integrity. Therefore, through meditation and the dedication to the highest principles that I know, I will achieve a great improvement in character. Now, this is very good, proper. It's been followed by sadhus and hermits for ages. It has been followed by early Christian monks for nearly 2,000 years.
In the next clip, he's going to talk about magnetism and its relationship to karma and how the electromagnetic field keeps the score. And so this thing that we call karma actually has a vehicle of manifestation, which is electromagnetic field. So the imbalances that we have psychologically and the behaviors that we do, they register a record in this in our auric field. And this record has to be rectified. And so it'll, the things that we set up in a cause-effect relationship, in terms of causes that we set up through certain behaviors that are immoral, for example, those will breed an effect. And that relationship between cause and effect is actually carried forth in the magnetic field. And so that magnetic field will come back in and exert its effect on us inevitably. And ultimately, that's how a cosmic order of justice is played out in each of our lives.
There's nothing wrong in meditation. But someone, out of the smartness of something, decided that by meditation he could also accomplish a certain amount of selfish fortune for himself. I know one individual who taught high disciplines for the sake of improving socially, making a wealthy marriage, increasing in business, dominating other people, and was doing very well with it. One day I got a telephone call from the local hospital. This individual was sick. So he went down. I said, well, what seems to be the trouble? It was a woman. She was in tears. She said, all my life, or for many years, I've taught people to think rich, think happy, think healthy, and I am dying of cancer. Well, that is again a strange kind of poetic justice that seems very cruel. No question about it. But the individual had broken the rules that associate with magnetic energies. The rule of all possession is right use. The use of all esoteric doctrines and disciplines is for the advancement of the common good. And when we start meditating for a fortune or something, we are headed to trouble. Because this is contrary to the proper use of magnetic resources. Magnetism is a great field of energy available to all. The price of it is simple. Earn it. You've got to be right. And all the energy of space is available for the right use that you can make of it. and as much of the right use as you can understandingly create at the proper time. But the moment the individual becomes selfish or self-centered, the magnetic field of his own body begins to fail. Kilner pointed out that there is great difference in these matters, and other scientists have noted that where selfishness comes into a religious situation, there's always a disappointment. And where we are selfish in marriage, where we are selfish in relationships, we are destroying the defenses of our own magnetic field. Now, actually, there is a certain poeticness in this injustice on these particular problems. The individual who is selfish and abuses the field loses the protection of his own life against the selfishness of others. If he loses his own protection, then the selfishness of others can move in on him. And if he tries to take something from another, he also opens the door for that person or some other person to take something from him. It is reciprocity. Energy is the most important and priceless of all ingredients. It is something that everyone needs and must have. The waste of energy, the abuse of energy, is the abuse of the magnetic fields. The moment they are abused, they fail us. And very often the failure is a kind of poetic justice.
Here coming up, Manly Hall is going to offer some motivating words of encouragement, as he is always prone to do. You know, he's not just an intellectual and a scholar, but he's very much a teacher, and so many people find comfort in his teachings because he can really be very motivating and encouraging in his teaching. So he's going to offer a little bit of that coming up.
So we're here today as part of a world of selfish people. We're here today with everybody trying to get theirs before somebody else takes it away from them. We're here in the presence of governments of questionable integrity, products of questionable value, and also another general factor which we must also face. And that is, we are now nearly 5.5, almost 6 billion disillusioned people. We have not much faith in anything. Every day the newspaper helps us to lose what honesty and faith we might have. We can become finally convinced that we live in a completely corrupt world. Therefore, we are bewildered, we are intimidated, we are worried, and very often just simply give up and follow the line of least resistance and go down with the rest. Now, this isn't really the way it was intended to be. Actually, the bad news that we have has nothing to do with us unless we're part of the bad program. Now, you might say it's nicer to imagine a world in which we could all work together. There's no doubt about it. That would be much better. But until such time, the individual who is trying to be right has got to be careful that he is not infected by a common disillusionment. He cannot afford to say everything is wrong and mean it. He's got to hold inside of himself a realization that principle is the basic value, and that regardless of what happens in the world, he cannot lose sight of protecting his own energy resources, because it might just so happen that he could be one of those who could help to change the course of history. In other words, disillusionment, despair, discouragement, bitterness, anger, frustration, all of these do nothing to the person against whom they are turned, but they do everything to the individual who uses them. Therefore, no matter what we read in the paper, no matter what comes to us over the radio or in television, the individual must retain within himself the realization that there is a great good behind everything, and that that great good will succeed, and that this magnetic field we're talking about, which extends not only through this solar system, but through the entire galaxy, decrees within itself by its own immutable process that evil can never win. We must go through certain travail in connection with it. We have to finally learn to our own satisfaction that we can't do it badly and be well off. But until such time, values never change. Never will we be punished for what somebody else does. Never will we be rewarded for the virtues of others. We must achieve these things ourselves through our own efforts, through our own integrities, and through our own dedications. And all of this is added up in a mysterious bank account, which is called energy or magnetic resource. It is there to serve us. It is there to serve the individual who does wrong. But if the individual does wrong, the service collapses. And the individual who does wrong finally finds the energy turns back upon himself. And the corruption continues.
In this next clip, he's going to revisit the idea that we talked a little bit about earlier, which has to do with the heart doctrine and the role of the heart as a core around which this electromagnetic fields of the person are built up and organized. And he's going to talk about the heart doctrine and also reference the idea of initiation and the relationship between the heart and initiation.
We must keep this center of consciousness within ourselves in a condition of correctness. In Buddhism, the heart is called the Saptapana, the house or temple with 7 rooms. It is within this temple, as Buddha points out, that the great initiation against the hindrances has to be performed. The individual has to be initiated in his own heart. He must accept as a fact that his own integrity is his only strength, and also that his own honesty is his only wealth. All else is some kind of a delusion, which will ultimately turn back and whip him. So in the quietude and peace of the realization of the immutability of good, the inevitability of right over wrong, the endless and continuous process of redemption going through every area of nature, all things in due time will come back into the peace which they sacrificed when they tried to put self as an individual above universal reality.
All right, here we come to an important clip. Now, remember, Manly Hall was giving this lecture, I don't know exactly when it was recorded, but I would guess it would be near the end of his life in the 70s or 80s. He's going to offer a warning to modern civilization. And this has to do with these themes that we're polluting our electromagnetic field and that it's going to reverberate against us in a self-destructive trajectory. And like I was saying before, this has to do with this idea of that we're living through an Armageddon. But this is not necessarily the literal interpretation of the Armageddon that you'll find in the Bible, but rather the philosophical, symbolical interpretation that has to do with initiation and this esoteric science of electromagnetism. So let's hear what he has to say.
I don't see how we have gotten into the state we've gotten into, really, because I do know, but I'm not mentioning it. The real fact of the matter is that as we look around us, there's every reason to know that we live in a beautiful world. We live in a tremendous sphere. And we are already beginning to realize that we're destroying it ourselves. It is not some vast cosmic power that says we have to be selfish or that puts a profit against principle. These things don't exist in nature. We know that with moderation, with integrity and dedication, we could all live in peace and another 5 billion could live with us. But the way we are doing, we are sacrificing everything for a bowl of pottage. And if we continue to do this, the energy resources will be reduced. We are worried now about changes taking place in the atmosphere, that the overload that we are throwing against our natural resources is beginning to endanger us. Now we can go under our own skin and see that the same thing is happening inside of us. The overloading of our body with the problems and processes of modern living obviously is going to result in destitution and death. We cannot afford to waste the magnetic field of the body or destroy it any more than we can afford to destroy the one of the earth. If we're going to run out of petroleum someday, we're also going to run out of the ability to recuperate from ailments if we dispose of and waste our recuperative power. The magnetism, which helps digestion, can be destroyed, wasted by corruption. When we take into ourselves dangerous foods, dangerous attitudes, or when we eat with a dangerous mood, we are endangering ourselves. And when the world does these things, the world endangers itself. And we will not be the first civilization, as I said in India, the great mother, the earth, has cast many civilizations from her back. Everything that goes beyond a certain point is destroyed because it breaks up its relation with its energy supply. It no longer is fed primarily by magnetism, because it's magnetism in the food that feeds us, it's magnetism in the air that we breathe, it's magnetism in the earth that grows our vegetables, and it is magnetism in our souls that makes us hope for good. All the things we know, all the things we believe in, are energy dependent. And the use of energy is the most important thing. Why we go on year after year making all kinds of efforts to feel better, be better, or think better, and overlook the one fact that everything that we think and feel and believe depends upon a life principle, an energy resource, a magnetism of the earth itself. And that while this is destroyed or while this is abused, we will have the earth becoming more and more sterile. We have air no longer fit to believe. We will find the energies we have wasted lost to us forever.
So that's a sobering message, but I hope you find it inspiring, and it catalyzes a type of fire within you to do better and to be better and to try to meet the needs of this collective emergency. Now we're going to be moving on to the final clip I have for you today, and it has to do with this idea that we need a new concept of religion that incorporates energy, this metaphysical science of energy, the idea of magnetism. And so we need to move beyond religion as more focused on scripture and outer institutional forms like churches and priests and things like that and rituals. And we need a concept of religion that's based on one hand, an experience of God and this experience of divinity, but on the other hand, a concept of religion that can align with the realities of nature, both physically and metaphysically. But we need a natural religion. And when most people think of natural religions, they think of like paganism or whatever. But actually, there's something to be learned from our ancestral concepts of religion, because this was a time when man was living very close to the earth, either as a hunter-gatherer or nomadic, tribal state, or in the early states when everything was agriculturally based. And that type of subsistence lifestyle, you lived and died with the motions of nature and of the seasons and of the earth. And so those natural processes formed of apt symbolism and an apt analogy and an apt ritualism that our religions could be based around. And the motion of mankind now into an industrial age and urbanization, one in which we're very detached from the processes of nature, we have a concept of religion that's also come very detached from nature. So there's a type of reorientation we need that regrounds religion in the realities of nature, but also energy. And so he's going to argue that we need a new concept of religion that can assimilate this esoteric science of energy and metaphysics that we've been talking about. And again, the key, in my view, is to tether religion to philosophy so that we have a sound philosophy of religion. We don't have religion detached from philosophy. So he's going to discuss that coming up.
All these things require just one new concept, and that is that religion is basically the proper use of resource. It is to use the privileges that we have been given for the greater good of all of us. We have been made gardeners in a beautiful garden, and we've let it go to weed. We have been given a beautiful planet, and we've subdivided it and sold it for profits. The original purpose was that we should become a wonderful group of human beings working together for the good of each other and the glory of the universe. We are being prepared for a bigger job than we have, but we are flunking the examination at the present moment. We are not doing what we should do. Everything that comes along is measured in profit. Everything that comes along is measured in freedom from responsibility. When energy is something that we must be responsible for, or we will waste it forever. Or as long as we can. By the time forever comes, there won't be much energy left. But all this is a lesson in the morality of values. It is a lesson in the fact that we are the keepers in a garden. We are the gardeners in the garden of Allah, as the Muslim calls it. This is a beautiful garden that has been given to us, and we're letting it go to weed. We had a beautiful world with wonderful materials, so we dig under the earth and create materials to create war, death, and destruction. We have little gardens that we could have beautiful times sitting under our own palm tree, but we're fighting to take everybody else's garden away from them. And when we finally find a small plot of land that we might be able to use, we find the real estate agents have priced it 10 times its value. All these things are all little things, but they all add up to the loss and waste of magnetic resource. They are the failure of the individual to protect the source of his own life, the source of his own future, and the breaking of the laws and rules by which he must compare his own needs with the needs of others. It is only when we work to protect the toadstool as well as the nation that we can have peace in the world. We must protect the small things because each of them is a energy resource. The protection of them is against our viewpoint because we take it for granted that the small should be controlled by the big. That small things, like humble people, are made to be exploited. This is not true. Everything in life is made to be used. Nothing is made to be abused. And the individual who abuses any part of life is contributing to the common cause of destruction. Now, this business of the energy and magnetic resource went on down through to the present time. And now we have a new measurement for it, and that is the development of a large group of electrical devices by means of which it becomes apparent to us that it is possible for the human being to make use of any energy as he sees fit. Now, the instrument that he has within himself is infinitely more wonderful than any television or any computer can possibly be. We can have a computer do everything, and it is alive. Don't for a minute think it isn't. But it is alive in a field of energy. It has a life, it can propagate itself, it can develop itself, it can grow up, it can grow old, and it can die. Because it is all part of an energy usage. But in all of these usages, let's remember that the individual is humanity's prime asset. The individual is here to grow. And in growing, he grows by helping everything else to grow. The moment he goes into negative competitive relationships with everything else, he destroys himself. So out of a great brotherhood involving potatoes, diamonds, computers, television, music, everything is part of a magnificent harmonic pattern. But the individual has forgotten or neglected to mature his own inner life. He was given religion in the beginning to help him to build an internal life, for religion was nothing but a statement of the rules. It wasn't a doctrine, it was a statement of the laws that have to be obeyed. Man has gradually disobeyed these rules, and now he questions the reality of religion. But he has never been able to prove that the religion was wrong. It was merely inconvenient. It prevented him from being as selfish as he would like to be. This being the case, he's in serious trouble. But out of all of this, we hope, with the coming of the next century, that we're going to find the real basis of our understanding. We're going to discover the good universe, which we have forgotten existed if we ever knew it. We're going to suddenly realize that galaxies and stars and systems in space are not just simply something out there to provide us with energy to run motors with, or that we're going to solve all the problems of nature if we can get a photograph of ourselves standing on Mars. This has nothing to do with it. We're living in a great, beautiful world of cooperating forces, filled with things that want to get together and work together for the common good. And all we can do is make games out of them. Silly games. Games in which we think we're conquering everything by putting something in orbit. That's not at all true. What really we are looking for is to realize that we conquer or we win or we achieve our goal when we put ourselves in orbit. Then we get back again into the rules of the game of life. Serve it as it should be served. Love as it should be loved. Admire the good, protect it, and slowly and quietly outgrow everything that is less. If we can do that, then these resources, these magnetic fields, will supply us with all the energy the world needs for millions of years. It will not be the loss of the energy, but it will be that if we do not make these corrections, we will not be able to draw the energy to ourselves, and that which cuts itself off from life is the dead branch that is cast back into the fire. So out of an understanding of energy and the magnetic resources, we go a long way toward solving the present problems. That's it.
All right. So to reemphasize the point that philosophy is the vehicle, this messianic vehicle of salvation, in my view, and one of the things that it does to provide this rejuvenation, the promise of rejuvenation, is that it's going to transform our relationship with these energy fields and allow us to actually optimize them instead of just to be the victim of them. Because in our ignorance, we imbalance them and then they react back upon us. And so if we have this deliberate, intentional relationship with these fields and they're now part of our awareness, then we can actively work with them, and that will completely transform how we engage with the reality in the world around us, both individually and collectively. And that new engagement is the promise of a new golden age, or a new Atlantis, as Sir Francis Bacon envisioned so many years ago. And so this is also the hope for a philosophic empire that Plato even, several millennia ago imagined. So this is what we need: is we need the philosophic empire, or the new Atlantis. And philosophy is the key, and the mechanism of action of transformation is this energy field, this new relationship with energy. And the effect of that will be to transform our understanding of religion and of science. So that's the promise of the world that is to come, and that is also our opportunity to build and create in this current moment in time as we're going through this collective Armageddon. So I'll leave you with that for now. Thanks, everybody, for tuning back in. This is the Wisdom Tradition Podcast. My name is Alex Sakin, and thank you very much. God bless.